Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill, I rise today, as I have in the past, to oppose the effort to bring physician-assisted suicide to New Jersey. And it pains me to have this debate again, but here we are. I know that the sponsor of this bill is seeking to bring about a more compassionate and just New Jersey. I believe that. I just disagree that this bill will get us there. I do not question that the sponsor of the bill is a friend. He's been nothing but a gentleman to me my time here in the legislature, and I believe in the sincerity of his efforts. But I hope he hears, as I speak this afternoon, the sincerity of our beliefs and why this bill would be bad for New Jersey. Mr. Speaker, it will make New Jersey neither more compassionate nor more just. And let's clarify it at the outset. I don't know anybody in this chamber who believes that a New Jerseyan should not have the right to refuse treatment if that treatment were futile. If that person doesn't want medical treatment, they should be able to refuse it. I don't know anybody in this chamber who opposes palliative care, compassionate treatment of those who are terminally ill and in great pain, great discomfort, and who seek to have that pain or discomfort relieved. I think we can all agree that that is important, and those are goals that should be protected and advanced. But what we're doing today, what the sponsor proposes to do is something very different from allowing people to refuse treatment or to give comfort to those who are dying. It raises questions as to what we owe the terminally ill and especially the elderly among us, those who are nearing the end of their lives and who know it. What do we owe them? What have they given to us in their lives? It could be our parents, our grandparents, uncles, dear friends, people who have taken care of us since we were children, people who have sent us to school, who have fed us, who have clothed us, who have raised us. And what do we owe them in their last months, in their last years on this earth? When they're in pain, when they're suffering, when they might have doubts, they question what comes next. There's a lot of fear and discomfort. And instead of loving them, and instead of embracing them, and instead of validating and affirming their lives and making sure that they understand that every minute they're on this earth is worth something, if we as a body believe that every person in this state is worth something, and it doesn't matter how disabled you are, how much pain you're in, or even what you think of yourself, if we think everybody in this state is worth something, then that means they're worth something to the very moment when they leave this earth. And what do we owe those people who are terminally ill? I think we owe them our compassion. I think we owe them our love, and I think we owe them our support. What we don't owe them is a bottle of pills to make it just a little quicker for them to leave this planet. Very concerned, Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned, and I think this body should be concerned about the right to die becoming what in effect becomes an obligation to die. We've all gone through, most of us have gone through these circumstances, end-of-life issues. We're dealing with our elderly parents, our elderly grandparents, in-laws. And I know this shapes people's opinions and their views and how they're going to vote today. But we know that our parents, as they're getting older or they're infirm, they don't want to be a burden on somebody. They don't want that we have to keep going to the hospital every day or the nursing home to hold their hand or to go shopping for them or to help them take care of their personal necessities. They don't want to spend down their last pennies. We know how expensive end-of-life care can be, how expensive a nursing home can be. That can wipe out someone's savings, life savings, in a few months. My dad watched my grandmother pass away, and she spent months and months and months, actually years, in a nursing home. And she had a nest egg that she had built up. My grandfather was a Depression kid, and he had saved, and he had left my grandmother with a nest egg, and it was gone. It was gone because my grandmother needed nursing care for the last several years of her life. When we put a price on those last few months or those last few years of life, and you put it to an elderly person or an infirm person, This is going to cost you your nest egg. You know that money you were going to leave to your grandchildren to send them to college? Well, if you stay alive another 6 months, it might not be there for them. Here's a few pills to make it a little quicker. You know that money that you wanted to send, you wanted to pay for your granddaughter's wedding? Well, if you stay alive for 6 months or a year, that'd be gone. Here's a few pills to make it a little quicker. What do we owe the people at the end of their lives? Don't make the right to die turn into an obligation to die. And so many times, I think, Mr. Speaker, this will turn into our elderly family members and our infirm family members thinking that now they have to end their lives more quickly so they're not a burden on us, or they can preserve their what they wanted to pass on, their estate, their inheritance, their nest egg to their children. That's not compassion, Mr. Speaker. And it doesn't make our state more just. A bill like this, when it passes, would create a new class of citizens among us. The class of citizens who can be killed by another citizen. We don't have that now, right? We call that murder now. This creates a new class of people in a society based on equality, where it doesn't matter what your race is, what your ethnicity is, what your gender is. We're celebrating Women's History Month. It doesn't matter in this society what your hair color is, what your size is, big, small, heavy, thin. We're all equal. Under this bill, if you're really, really sick and you don't want to live anymore, now you can be killed by a fellow citizen. It destroys that fundamental human equality that we're based on. And it turns a society that's supposed to be based on equality decidedly unequal. Once you cross this line, Mr. Speaker, there's no going back. And we've seen that from the advocates of bills like this. We've seen it from the experience abroad. We know that advocates for bills like this are more than ready to expand the coverage, not just to people who have 6 months to live in a prognosis, but for those who have dementia or cognitive disease that would prevent people from making the affirmative choice to kill themselves. Barbara Coombs-Lee, I believe she was the president of Compassion and Choices Society, said, you know, that's interesting about dementia or cognitive illnesses. It's an issue for another day, but it's no less compelling. That's where this goes. This isn't a slippery slope, and we've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not a slippery slope. It's a road paved to expansion. We know that's what's happened in the Netherlands, Mr. Speaker. We know that the Netherlands has been a leader in the world for physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia. The Guardian publication, medical publication, did an analysis recently, and I want to read from that for the benefit of this body so that you can hear what happens when you cross the line, when you create a class of people who can be killed by another. The Guardian wrote called Death on Demand, Has Euthanasia Gone Too Far? And the Guardian wrote, as people got used to the new law, the number of Dutch people being euthanized began to rise sharply, from under 2,000 in 2007 to almost 6,600 in 2017. Around the same number are estimated to have had their euthanasia requests turned down for not conforming with the legal requirements. Also in 2017, some 1,900 Dutch people killed themselves, while the number of people who died under palliative sedation, in theory succumbing to their illness while cocooned from physical discomfort, but in practice often dying of dehydration while unconscious, that's a practice known as terminal sedation, hit an astonishing 32,000 people in 2017. Altogether, well over a quarter of all deaths in 2017 in the Netherlands were induced, either suicides, euthanized, or under terminal sedation. Wesley Smith comments on this report in The Guardian, and he writes, since euthanasia was first decriminalized in the Netherlands, the country's doctors have traveled a very dark road. Induced deaths have expanded from the terminally ill who ask for it, to the chronically ill who ask for it, to people with disabilities and the elderly who ask for it, to people with dementia, psychiatric patients with mental illness. There were 83 of them in 2017, and infanticides of babies born with serious or terminal illnesses or disabilities who don't have the capacity to ask for it. Dutch law permits organ harvesting to be conjoined with euthanasia. There have been joint geriatric killings of couples fearing widowhood. In 2015, Dutch statistics revealed 431 patients were killed by doctors who never asked for euthanasia, known in the lexicon as termination without request or consent, with next to nothing done about it, even though such unasked for lethal acts are technically murder under the law. Mr. Smith continues, does this mean the Dutch are horrible, ghoulish people?
We can read the article. I mean, I don't think we need to hear the entirety of the article. I mean, if we could get back to your argument, I understand.
I've got two more sentences, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's...
Then I didn't mean to cut you off 2 sentences from the end.
I
apologize.
I think it's pertinent. I appreciate your paying attention so closely, Mr. Speaker. So Mr. Smith writes, I think it might be Dr. Smith, does this mean the Dutch are horrible, ghoulish people? Absolutely not. But they are logical. Once the population widely accepted the premise that killing is an acceptable answer to suffering, the country took that belief precisely where it leads. It's not confined to the Netherlands. Oregon, as I think most in this body know, has led the way in America, Mr. Speaker, and already the Oregon legislature is pushing to expand qualifications and expand its assisted suicide laws. There are bills to eliminate the waiting periods to allow patients to receive a prescription for lethal drugs on the same day they're requested. Bills to expand the definition of terminal illness, which is currently 6 months, which was what this legislation would do, to mean a disease that will, quote, produce or substantially contribute to a patient's death. This could include diseases like alcoholism. Frankly, if you're alive, we've got a condition that's going to lead to our death at some point. A defined terminal illness to include a degenerative condition that will, at some point in the future, be the cause of a patient's death. That would open up legal drugs to anyone. That's Oregon, seeking to push the boundaries on this bill, Mr. Speaker, and laws like this. And as my colleague referred to, it's why the New Jersey Medical Society, the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, all oppose physician-assisted suicide. There are more reasons to oppose it. This isn't just physician-assisted suicide, this is taxpayer-funded physician-assisted suicide. And the sponsor and I have talked about this, we've talked about it publicly. Medicaid in New Jersey would cover the suicide regimen for those in our state, conscripting taxpayers to pay for something that so many find abhorrent. And as we've seen in California, the government would pay for procedures to terminate someone's life when they wouldn't pay for procedures that might save it. In California, 1 in 3 Medi-Cal patients with diagnosed terminal cancer couldn't get approval for life-saving treatments or potentially life-saving treatments in California because the government wouldn't pay for it. But the government would pay $5,400 to give them the pills to allow them to kill themselves. And if Medicaid is going to do that, mind you, that's all New Jersey taxpayer dollars. The federal government won't pay for this. The federal government, under Bill Clinton, outlawed federal dollars being used for physician-assisted suicide. If Medicaid is going to do that, of course, insurance companies will do that. So now your insurance company will have the ability to make the decision that it will fund your death, but it won't fund your life. It will fund poison to kill you, but it won't fund medicines to make you better. That's what this bill opens up the door to. Mr. Speaker, we've made this argument several times in the last few years. In the last few years, I've had the privilege of having my 2 oldest daughters become teenagers. And a bill like this, in the context where we find ourselves in 2019, becomes even more important to someone like me, and frankly, some should be more important to, or should be important to everyone. But I think about the crisis we're having in America today, fighting teen depression, combating the problem of teen suicide. And I ask you whether it's going to be harder or easier after this bill is passed to talk to a teenager about why they shouldn't commit suicide. Being around teenagers enough now, one thing I think we can agree on, teenagers hate hypocrisy. They smell it from a mile away and they challenge it and they don't want to listen to it. And the pain that some of our teenagers are in, 16, 17, 18 years old, to the point where they feel like they have to end their lives, the emotional anguish, the mental anguish that they are in, is no less real to them than the physical pain and the emotional anguish that someone who has a terminal illness might be feeling. And if we say it's okay for their neighbor who might be in physical anguish or mental anguish, for their neighbor to end their lives, and they turn around and say, well, I'm depressed, I'm having suicidal thoughts, and it's not worth living anymore, and you know what? It's okay now. The state of New Jersey says it's okay to commit suicide. How am I any different? Passing this bill today doesn't make that conversation any easier for parents or therapists who have to confront that very logical extension, a very logical argument for disturbed kids in the state. It does a disservice to our children, and it does a disservice to parents and therapists who have to deal with mental illness and emotional anguish and emotional distress and teens who are given to suicidal thoughts. And so, Mr. Speaker, I speak from time to time on the floor. You might have noticed on occasion I get up and
I've been here a time or two.
I express my opinion occasionally on a bill. And sometimes those comments are more directed to my constituents. Sometimes those comments are more directed to the rest of the state. Sometimes my comments are directed towards posterity, so that somebody knows somebody was saying something when you did X, Y, or Z. My comments are often addressed to my colleagues, but I understand that my colleagues' minds are often made up when they come to the floor. They've had their discussions. To the extent I can persuade somebody, I hope to. I've been here about 11 years. I've never said the following, I think. I've never said the following on the floor. And that is to my colleagues, I am pleading with you. I'll even beg you not to vote for this bill. We voted on it before you passed it out of this House. It wasn't going to get signed into law. You pass it out of this House today, it might get signed into law. And once you cross that line, there's no going back. There's only one way these laws go, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And so, to the extent that I can persuade you, to the extent that you are open to hearing this, I'm asking you, don't do this, please. It will not make our state more compassionate. It will not make our state more just. It'll lead our state down a road that won't be good for anyone, and especially those people who wind up voting for it. Mr. Speaker, at this point, because the bill is so grave, because the issues are so serious, and because it would lead us down such a bad road, I would make a motion to move that Assembly Bill 1504 lay over.